Please inspect all packages upon arrival to ensure materials are correct and complete. If anything is missing or incorrect, contact customer service immediately. Checking the package right away will help avoid delays in your project.
We have essentially 3 different styles of post. We have our straight run posts, basically holes on opposite sides. Okay, stand little pin on top. Our corner posts, where we've got holes on kitty corner, holes on 3 sides. Okay, and we have our stair post, holes on opposite sides and a swivel pivot. There's an Allen wrench here that can be loosened to probably change and tighten the pivot here. Kind of heavy duty, looks like 3.5-inch lag bolts. I'm gonna be pre-drilling with essentially a 1/4-inch drill bit. These are pretty substantial. You wanna make sure you clear out some wood materials so you're not splitting anything. So the first one, we're gonna start with this corner. When I install face-mounted posts on a single border deck, typically my back is just about gonna line up with my border. And that when I drill down, this bolt is gonna go into my final side bond joist, and these 2 are gonna go into my front bond, and then, which is 2x8, both of these, and then this, essentially just this one will end up hitting my blocking. So you're gonna need your drill, you're gonna need your impact set up with your bit that they gave you. Give you a mountain of these too. So I'll mark them out. So you can see my one hole is going to be kind of right in this corner. Got another one here, which are easy to start and hidden from the cracks. And I have 2 here. Okay, I'm going to just pre-drill these. Another thing when I do face-mounted posts, you want to be careful not to fully tighten any of them. You kind of go around and just gradually cinch them down. This will help you if you have any kind of imperfection in the framing, which is pretty common. You might run into some issues where you might need a shim. Typically with face-mounted posts, if you do need to use a shim, it's a very small amount because it telegraphs over the length of the post. So I'm just going in, I'm gonna put all of them in. You can see this one's not tightened. I'm just putting all of them in first, and then I'll slowly go around and tighten them as I'm leveling. I usually like to use an extender because it gives you a little better approach angle. You can see as I'm doing this, my impact is pushing up against the post. An extender gives you a little better angle at that. In mind with this railing is that it is steel, so you're gonna have a little harder time cutting it, drilling into it. Here's a couple examples of, when you cut, you might get pieces like this. There's gonna be a little bit of a sharp edge here. You're probably gonna wanna give a sand or a light file to ease that edge enough so it's not gonna cut anybody. Beyond just the burrs, sometimes there's some disturbance of the paint. It's hard to tell there, but the heat can sometimes melt the paint a little. This isn't too bad, but all that we're doing is taking some sandpaper to a block, giving it a light sand just to ease that edge, or a light file to ease that edge. You're going to want to get a specialty miter blade to make these cuts. Another major thing that we encountered is the screws. If you look here, the railing is held onto the brackets through these holes here that you drill a pre-drill hole and then you screw into. They provide you with a drill bit, which does a fine job of the pre-drilling. We did find that the screws provided would just, they didn't grab, and they would just, the threads would just give. I don't know if you can see that, but the threads just couldn't hold up. So we ended up buying some Tex 3/4 metal to metal self-tappers. That's what these look like. These are 5/16 hex head. We're still pre-drilling these holes, but these are doing a much better job of fastening our post brackets to our railing. And I'll give a demonstration of that here in a minute. Another thing that we encountered on our particular project is our seams of our steel top rail aren't necessarily aligning over top of our posts. If they were aligning over top of our post, you can see in this instance, our seam is over top of our post. So we're using the acrylic block halfway into each side. And then in this case, we're screwing up here and we're screwing up here, and that's holding these together. Now, if your seam is not able to be over your posts, you still use the acrylic block. But in that case over here, we've basically just, we pre-drilled a hole into our steel on either side, and then we used kind of like a low profile black screw to screw into our acrylic block, and that holds this together. Actually feels pretty rigid for what it is. And once all of the railing is screwed into the posts, I feel confident that it's going to be pretty rigid assembly overall. You know, we cut our miters first, so we've got one in this corner here, and then we'll have one over there. This is a different scenario, which we'll go over later. But basically, we cut our miter, and then we cut our flat cut after. It's a lot easier to cut the flat cut, and the chance of there being an issue with the joint is much smaller, so it's better to finesse your miter, make sure you're happy with it, and then cut the remaining end. We also decided to put our top rail together before screwing it into our posts. Part of the reason for this is not wanting these acrylic pieces to get them into the railing as it's already up, and part of the reason is to make sure everything is cut to the size the way we want, everything is as we want it, and then attaching it. Somebody had the great idea, it wasn't me, to put these in the freezer because they're pretty tight getting into the ends of the, they have created a nice little chamfer to make the beginning part go a little smoother. But you know, if there's any roughness on the inside of this, or especially after you've pre-drilled your hole, there might be, you know, some roughage on the other side. So freezing it does ever so slightly shrink it. So if you put these in the freezer, quick little tip, they'll be a little bit easier to get into the end of your railing. I'm not saying you won't have to mallet it, but it will make a significant difference. So our overall process was to first cut the piece to size. So we cut the miter. If we had to make a cut on the other end, we'd make the cut on the other end. Then we would pre-drill the hole like this. If we're making I'll just call this like an acrylic block. But if we're making a flat to flat connection and we're using the acrylic block, we would make a hole larger than the size of the screw, knock in our acrylic block, put the screw into the block, knock the other piece on. The other piece would also have a hole. Knock that on, screw it together. And then as you can see, this railing is not yet attached. This is what I would consider a dry fit, right? This is a dry run to make sure we're happy with everything. We don't need to make any adjustments, and then we'll screw them together. And rather than marking and pre-drilling, we are just going to drill from underneath. We're gonna have somebody up top just giving pressure. I'll drill from underneath and sink those screws. Like I said before, we're using different screws than the ones provided. I'm just gonna give a quick demonstration of how it'll be a little easier to see from this angle, but you know, this is attached to the tops of our posts. These are the brackets. The railing goes on top, and then we're attaching from underneath with these 4 holes. So I'm just gonna give a little demonstration. We're gonna be drilling down. In this case, it is an 11/64 bit. Seems to work pretty well. Anytime you're drilling through steel, you just want to go slowly and press directly perpendicular as hard as you can, basically. Okay. The more spirally your little shards are, the sharper the bit was and the better the cut. So this is underneath the railing, right? And then these are the Tex 3/4 inch screws. Anything similar to this that's designed for a metal to metal connection, ideally a self-tapper, because while we're pre-drilling, this self-tapper will get any extra and give it exactly the right size that those threads want. Okay. And that is a secure connection. We have now put up all of the top rail, and we are in the process of starting our first few cable runs. Just wanted to go over a few things that we encountered during our top rail installation.
The first thing to mention here was our decision to drill from underneath. We're straining here because the drilling through steel requires much more effort than aluminum, which is the style of railing that we've become most accustomed to. It would have been easier drilling if we had marked the holes and then flipped over the railing. That would have allowed us to drill from above, which is the recommended through the instructions method. In our case, we had pre-connected the top rail pieces in a run to make sure it laid over the post the way we needed it to. Drilling from underneath would be impossible with one person, and in general, I'd recommend marking the holes and removing the piece to drill. This is how I solved for our horizontal to stair rail transition. I've seen some pictures of installations online where they have 2 posts at the top of the stairs, keeping the horizontal and stair runs separate, but the homeowner was pretty adamant that it was preferable to minimize posts, and I have to agree it looks much more clean and seamless than if we'd gone with the route of the 2 posts. This did mean, however, that I had to make a custom piece out of the acrylic blocks they sent us. I essentially cut one down the middle at half our staircase angle, then carefully applied epoxy, pre-drilled, and screwed them together. And then after the epoxy set, I sanded the piece down smooth so it could slide easily into the railing for a snug fit. I also had to cut off one side of the mounting bracket on top of the post so it wouldn't impede the stair railing.
Now here, when we did the stairs, being able to drill into the top rail through the bracket, The brackets have a hex head set screw. We just pull that out and this top part of the bracket is able to come off completely. Screwed that top part of the bracket in with the rail off, set the rail in, and then put those set screws back in. And that's kind of how that worked. The other thing that I would definitely suggest before you start running the cable, and we did this as well, is measure all of your runs and start with your longest runs. So if you make a mistake and you have to, if you got it too short, then you can always use that cable on one of your other runs. Otherwise, you know, you might be wasting cable and you might not have enough for your project if that ends up happening. So we measured our 2 runs. This one was about 25 feet. Our other run was about a little more than 27. So we're starting and we're gonna do all of our cable on this side, and then we're gonna finish by doing all of our shorter cables. That way, if any mistakes happen here, at least the cable can be reused for this side.
Here, I'm crimping the start of a run. The cable is already run through the posts, and I'm cutting the cable a few inches long, just for ease of use. Next, I unscrew the threads from the thread stud from what they call the invisible receiver. I feed the cable in it all the way, and then crimp the cable into the thread stud using the hydraulic crimper. Then I carefully reconnect the thread stud to the invisible receiver inside the post. In this case, we're starting at the bottom of the stairs, so we're also using an angled bushing or stair adapter. When you reconnect the thread stud to the invisible connector, make sure to only screw on 1 or 2 threads so you have plenty left to tighten the cable once the other side has been connected. You really need the most threads possible to get a nice tight cable. Plus there's the potential of it slacking in future just through stretch, so you'll want to be able to tighten it as time goes on as well.
Got a nice little setup here to keep it from, just to keep it smooth. It's just reeled off. There's a nice engineered thought there by Matt. Once he gets to the end, he's gonna let me know and I'm gonna crimp this. He's leaving it probably, you know, about 6 inches long over there. So we're not worried about the specific cut here. We're just cutting it so it's pretty close, and then we'll pull the tension on that side. Long enough. So I'm gonna cut this. I'm gonna feed on the female end here all the way until it hits the bottom. I'm gonna put a couple of, make this a little bit closer. Okay. So putting this in, I'm about a 1/4 inch or so away from the cable, getting it tight, crimping it down, okay. And then you can see, no daylight there, okay. You know, you loosen up the hydraulic, it releases it, and then you feed through the top like that. See, this is plenty long, so it's easy to make the stair connection. The issue with the stair side connection is it's difficult. If we were doing our final crimp on this side, we wouldn't have any of the sleeve to hold on to. So that's why we're doing it on the other side. So I'm just threading on a couple of threads, and then we start hand tightening. I'm pulling the cable just hand tight, and I'm making a mark here right at the end of the grommet. This is about what we want tension wise in order to be able to still thread the sleeve from the male to female. If we do too short, even if it's just a 1/2 inch off, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to get that first few threads on. And if it's too long, then you can't get the cable tight enough. So this is kind of the sweet spot for us right now. Here we go. Again, it's basically no daylight. Okay, so then Matt comes over. Then I bring in the big guns.
Put some tension on.
Yeah.
So we get it connected.
Yep. Bring the Hulk over. And this, if you want to see what he's doing, these needle nose have been a real asset as far as pulling the cable straight through. You can't really grab onto it with your hands because you end up bending it and creating more tension. But he's just got it. He's using that as a tool to help get him closer. And I'm just putting a couple of threads on, and then we're good. We can tighten it on both ends now.
I honestly don't think we could have done this with one person unless there was a way to make the connection inside the post with slack. We basically needed the cable cut at the exact sweet spot where if we pulled it as tight as we could by hand, we could tighten the rest using the threads. It was challenging to make the connection inside the post, but even more so when having to use strength.
Okay, I got it. Okay. So that shows you a little bit of, you know, the strain and difficulty to get it in there, but the issue is if you don't have it long enough, it's really difficult to make that connection inside the post. And again, if it's too short, if it's too short, it's gonna be really difficult to make that connection. If it's too long, you won't get it tight enough because there's not enough threads on both sides to pull more than maybe 1 inch total. So it's manageable with 2 people, and really you're gonna have to use some muscle to get it more tight than just the hand tight to make that first connection. And you know, it's pretty tight now, and we haven't tightened our both ends yet. So you can get it tighter, but that's the best way that we found. After I get my threads in and I kind of pull it hand tight, Matt is already putting grommets in. So it kind of works nice. You know, one person puts in the sleeves, the other person's putting in the grommets. He's able to basically just use both thumbs, press them in firmly. One thing that I'll say about the slits, you can see here there's a slit. So especially on the corners, you want to have the slit away from where the compression of the cable will be, which will be against this side. We did have one that the slit was on the same side, and it ended up just accentuating the separation. So when you're doing the corner post on a run through, have the slit facing away from where the cable will be tightened. On the stair grommets, just in general, they're just harder and require more patience and diligence. Remember, this is steel. This is a seam of factory edge, so the edges are painted, but the insides of these tubes are not painted, and I can only imagine some water will get in here, so it may begin to rust around the edges. That's something to see in the future. We have a factory edge against a cut edge. You can see our cut edge, you know, there's not full paint coverage there, but that's factory edge. And then over here on our miter, kind of melted away paint right here during our cut heated up a bit when we were using the saw, and there's a little bit of separation there, but water will get in here. And I would probably recommend sealing it in some way, whether it's just like a little, if you're careful with a little bit of black silicone, you know, you could put like you could drizzle a little bit of epoxy, or you could find some way to prevent water from getting in there. It's gonna preserve and extend the lifetime of the steel here. Same thing, especially over here is a good spot to see. It's actually a decent seam, but the paint has worn away. There's a little bit of stuff here too, so that's just something to keep an eye out for. I would definitely recommend trying to do something.